Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of 91.7 FM KALW Information Radio for San Francisco.
Continuing conversations that begin at Philosopher's Corner at Stanford University.
And today we're going to continue a conversation that actually began way back in ancient Greece. John, you remember those conversations,
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. They were in Greek. I didn't understand them very well.
Yeah. So our question today is this any way to run a democracy? And we're going to try and answer that question, right? Democracy, that's a really good thing, don't you think, John?
A really good thing. Well, Ken, I imagine there you're just mouthing what you were taught as a child. One of the things philosophers have to do that is most difficult is to take an idea or a concept that they've been taught from infancy is the right way to look at things or the wrong way to look at things, and to hold it out at arm's length and take a step back and ask rationally without any presuppositions, is what I've been told about this right? So you tell me, Ken, what is so good about this thing, democracy, that's supposed to be so good?
John, democracy is a deeply moral a deep, moral, just solution to a real problem of human life. They call it the problem of common life. I mean, here we are, all these people. They have their diverse ways of life. They have their diverse points of view. I mean, I'm for abortion rights. You're opposed to abortion rights. I think hang the 10 Commandments up in every school. I think keep those 10 Commandments out of my school. I think tax the rich.
I kind of like 2, 4, 6, and 8. But
you mean those commandments?
Yeah, right.
And look, how do we resolve this? How do we have a life together? We don't shoot each other. One doesn't dominate over the other. We each get an equal say through vote and democratic procedures in how we're going to run our lives in a way that respects all of our autonomy and you know.
Well, that helps me, Ken. That's certainly a valuable thing about democracy. And that explains why I don't think it's working very well, at least in the nationwide level. Because what our national leaders mostly do is foreign policy, and we don't actually have any say in that. I mean, they decide to fight wars or not fight wars. Who votes? Nobody votes.
Well, we don't vote on each of their decisions, but we elect them to office. They're our representatives, and they're held accountable to us every 4 years or every other year.
The senators and representatives don't pay diddle attention to if the president says, let's go to war, they go to war. I really think it'd be much better. I mean, I do feel better about California. Money counts for too much here, but we do have a democracy. The governor is elected popularly. The legislature, both houses are elected one person, one vote. And then we have this incredibly good system of referendums and propositions and initiatives, so that we're actually getting to vote on a lot of things that our legislature is too craven to take up.
Oh God, John, incredibly
We need more of that
good.
Democracy at the national level, don't you think, Ken?
Oh gosh, incredibly good. I think there should be one proposition allowed per election period or something like that. There's such a thing as too much democracy.
Like this time it could be like if you run an India casino and you're in prison for 3 strikes or out, you can get out if you'll do stem cell research. Is that the way it would work?
John, there's such a thing as too much democracy. Democracy should have a deliberative character. The citizens should think together about how they're going to live their common life and then vote. But this proposition stuff, it's an absence of deliberation. So we should have this deliberative thing. So there's too much democracy in California. And our roving philosophical reporter, Amy Standen, she went out and talked to some Californians about the state of our democracy. She files this report.
On Election Day, Californians aren't just electing a president. They're voting on 16 propositions, making decisions over billions of dollars of state money.
Do you know what Proposition 71 is?
No, I don't.
Do you know what Proposition 60 is?
No.
What about 64?
No, I don't know what that one is either.
One proposition authorizes a $3 billion loan for stem cell research. Another would have police take DNA samples of everyone arrested for a felony. Not convicted, just arrested.
Do you know what Proposition 71 is?
No.
Do you know what Proposition 64 is?
Nope.
Do you know Proposition 71?
Which one is that?
2 other propositions on casinos have stirred up such an intense propaganda campaign that it's hard to tell what they do.
I can't remember which one that is.
I'm not sure which one that is.
66?
No.
I'm not up on all the props, to be honest with you.
Is 64 the one that has to do with legalized gambling?
Indian gaming or,
Okay, so maybe that's not a fair question. I'm sure some of these people would recognize the names of the propositions, even if they don't know the numbers, but do they know enough to vote on them?
Oh, absolutely. I compare the capsule reviews and the voter guides with the capsule reviews in the Guardian and the Green Voter Guides.
I usually will read the paper a day or two before to kind of make decisions.
I'll do a Google search on California bills that are on the ballot and read up on them.
Do you think most people know about the propositions that they vote on?
Nope.
So I wonder, is that a good way for a state to make a decision?
I don't think it is.
The word democracy means rule by the people. But historically, only 48% of Americans vote in general elections. That ranks us number 139 worldwide in voter turnout. In case you're wondering, Italy wins with 92% voter turnout, which probably has something to do with the fact that it's illegal not to vote in Italy. Still, while it's mandatory to pay taxes, wear seatbelts, and if you're an 18-year-old man, register with a selective service, the idea of compulsory voting strikes a lot of people as un-American.
Do you think that there should be a law requiring people to vote?
No,
Why not?
because it's an individual decision.
People have their own right to do whatever they want.
Should there be a penalty for people who don't vote?
This is America. We still have the freedom to choose.
Because it's America and you can do whatever you want.
This is America and we have the right to do what we want to do. There's freedom.
Do you think there should be a law requiring people to vote?
Yes, definitely. I mean, people get away with not voting. We get stuck with somebody we don't like.
So there should be a penalty for not voting.
A penalty or imprisonment.
So what qualifies America as a democracy? Is it that people can vote, or that people do vote? Is it still a rule of the people if only half of them speak up? For Philosophy Talk, this is Amy Standen.
I'm John Perry. I'm here with my colleague Ken Taylor on Philosophy Talk, and we're discussing the question, is this any way to run a democracy?
And to help us answer that question, we're joined by our guest. He's Professor Josh Ober. He's the David Maggi Professor of Classics at Princeton, although he has the honor this year of being a fellow at Stanford Center for the Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences. He's moving up in the world. He's the author of a book, a very fine book, A Company of Citizens, that was published in 2003, and his forthcoming book, Athenian Legacies, Essays on the Politics of Going On Together. Josh, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks very much, Ken, John.
Glad to have you here, Josh. Now Amy's piece highlighted some of the problems with our California democracy, but I'd like to start our discussion on a real positive note. What, in your opinion, are the best things, the best arguments for the democratic form of government?
Well, I think probably the best argument you can make really is that people are the best judges individually of their own interests and their own preferences. And that if you assume that there's no one person or small group of experts who could actually know better than you do what your interests are, and then you assume there's no expert who could actually secure you your real interests better than you could yourself, then democracy seems to be really the only way to go. If you believe, in a sense, in yourself as someone capable of understanding your interests.
But wait a minute. That argument seems to me kind of quick, because you say democracy is, for each of us, the best way of securing each of our own interests or something like that. But isn't the governance should be about the interest of the state, about the common good? So why should the fact that I'm the best judge of my own interests, why should that lead to democracy? I mean, it's supposed to be about the common good, not...
That leads to democracy in the first instance. Basically, what you have to do to get democracy off the ground is make an assumption about equality. If we assume that people are radically unequal, if we assume that people simply have no sort of baseline equality, then we probably should say that whoever is the superior one should be the guy who makes the judgment about what's good for all of us, what the common good actually is. We have to decide, where that common good actually comes from.
Well, so equality, then, is the premise that leads to democracy. I know that Rawls, in his famous theory of justice, argues that the people in the original position, that means the people who are sitting down to decide what rules the state they're going to have would run under, he seems to think they would think it was very important to have a democracy, to have a vote. But I'm not so sure if I was one of the group, I think I'd give up my vote to more intelligent people if people could show me a good way of deciding who was more intelligent.
The thing is, you'd have to actually believe that those more intelligent people really had your interests in mind. Because they're intelligent, would they actually also be guaranteed to be beneficent? Could you guarantee that they would actually care about you? Someone who, after all, by your very definition, isn't their equal, is rather less than that.
But suppose we had a system a little bit like Plato's, but where we we did actually try to select people that genetically looked like they could be beneficent, wise leaders, and then gave them training so that they would be beneficent, wise leaders, and maybe not treat them as kings that own everything, but treat them as people that actually have to forego a lot of privileges and really try to breed and educate leaders. Wouldn't that be better than this crazy democracy we have?
No. The reason it wouldn't be because, A, you would never be able to identify such people. B, you'd have to suppose that those people would remain beneficent over time and would be able to reproduce beneficence over time. And so you have to make this very strong assumption that those beneficent people would actually know what's important for you.
I want to go back to my interests versus the common good again, because I take it a form of collective life is about not just my interest and your interest, but something like our interest, right? And I'm just not sure how you get from I'm the best judge of what's in my interest to, well, I should have what kind of voice in determining the common good, what's for the common good. I mean, suppose I'm radically opposed to abortion or something like that. I mean, how is it supposed to follow that, I should have an equal say in whether...
That's one of the big problems that democracy has. On the one hand, democracy seeks to find something like the common good. The argument basically is made by Pericles in Thucydides' history, as reported by Thucydides anyway, that if you really understand what's good for the community, you'll understand that your individual good only flows from working together for a common good. So that's the notion, but it gets harder when people have absolutely entrenched views that they simply won't give up, and that they go into whatever deliberative assembly you have only seeking to gain an already entrenched view without any interest in negotiating, without any interest in ever even potentially changing their mind.
So you could have a view about democracy that what it does, it sort of does the vector addition of our competing interests. So you vote no, I vote yes, he votes no, he votes yes, and we just add them up. And the common good is just what comes out of this vector addition of the competing interests. We each get one vote, and that's a kind of fair procedure for adding up and subtracting the competing interests.
But to go back to an argument Ken used in the intro, it seems like one good thing about democracy is that people will work out their differences and feel invested in the decision even if it doesn't agree with them. But there are limits to that. The issue of slavery was one that they try as they could not handle democratically. Maybe abortion has that situation too. Is there a better way than democracy for these really decisions that are so wrapped up in basic values that we can't decide them democratically?
This gets into the question about democracy and how democracy deals with the rule of law. Because, after all, democracy can't always decide everything by majority vote and still be fair.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that some more. I mean, that's a big question, big issue you're bringing up. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're asking, is this any way to run a democracy? Our guest is Professor Josh Ober from Princeton University. We'd like to hear from you as well. We are eager to have you join us. This is a democratic forum today. Call us at 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Tell us what you think about democracy.
After the break, we're going to focus on the question, what's the reality of democracy? So maybe you can give us your opinion about that. What is our problem here in America? Too much democracy or too little democracy? The number again is 415-841-4134. Or go to our website, philosophytalk.org, and send us an email comment that we can consider on the air.
Philosophy Talk will be right back.
John Cougar Mellencamp and Little Pink Houses. I am John Perry. You're listening to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. Today we're asking the question, is this any way to run a democracy? With our guest, Josh Ober from Princeton University. Josh, before the break, we were talking about the rule of law, and I want to ask you a question about, look, obviously we don't think that democracy just unbridled is a good thing, because we have a constitution which says there's certain things the government can't do. There's certain things that the people in their collective voice can't do. They can't prohibit minorities from voting. They can't stifle political speech, right? Those are constraints on the government and thereby constraints on the people. So, I mean, that seems to be an essential ingredient. Is that essential to democracy that there should be these limits? I mean,
I think that freedom is essential to democracy. I think you can't have democracy without a strong conception of individual freedom, and you can't have strong individual freedom without some protection for the individual, with some security of the individual against the kind of power of the strongest people in the community. So I think that whether that's strongest people in the community are government officials, or whether it's just, the guy who has a lot of money and or is just physically stronger than you are. So I think that freedom really is essential. How that freedom is guaranteed, whether it's guaranteed through a constitutional agreement or whether it's guaranteed through the unwritten way that the community is structured, that can vary from community to community.
Couldn't you imagine, though, a democracy that prohibited religious freedom? So an Islamic democracy, you could have a vote for candidates, but the state religion is Islam, and so there would be a kind of.
Well, isn't that the situation in Israel? We think of Israel as a democracy, the bulwark of democracy in the Middle East, but it's got a state religion, and it influences a lot of the laws.
This is one of the really big issues about democracies, is that what's on the table and what isn't on the table about the people's authority or about the individual's freedoms. And I think it is the case that you can have a nation that is procedurally democratic, but in fact writes off a lot of things that you and I might agree that shouldn't be
right. So
off.
there's the kind of rights and freedoms that are essential to democracy, right? Participatory rights. But freedom of thought or expression or something like that, or worship, you might distinguish between, people sometimes distinguish between liberal and illiberal democracies, right? Liberal democracies respect freedom of thought and expression and all that, but those aren't, one might think, essential. See, and in another way, might it not be the case that it's easier to have a democracy where people don't have such conflicted views about what to worship,
That's absolutely true. That democracy gets harder as true diversity grows. That doesn't mean that democracy becomes impossible at any given point, but it does mean you have to work a lot harder at it, and it does mean that the rule of law has to do more work.
Josh, I want to shift gears here a little bit. We have a very peculiar democracy in considering the world over, because we don't have a parliamentary democracy. We only have elections every 4 years for the most powerful person, and during that 4 years, he can run the country so far in the ditch without really asking much from anybody, because he controls foreign policy, just speaking in the abstract hypothetical here, that it's going to be very hard to get the car back out of the ditch. Wouldn't a parliamentary democracy be better than this thing that we've got?
That's an interesting question. I've never been convinced that parliamentary democracy really would secure all of the kind of liberties we are committed to, and would also solve all of the deformations that we have unfortunately become accustomed to. One of the problems with parliamentary democracy is it often devolves into a whole bunch of splinter parties, each one of which can potentially have much more power than they actually have numbers of supporters, because the parties have to create these alliance structures and bring in a splinter party which can negotiate for a lot of authority.
That's an interesting thing. Let's have some of our callers weigh in here, though. Make this a democratic forum today. Janan in San Carlos. Did I get that right, Janan? Janine
in San Carlos, yeah.
Hi, Janine.
What's your question or comment, Janine?
My comment is democracy depends on an educated electorate, and we don't have one.
You want to expand on that, or you just think
you mean
we don't have anybody in our electorate?
I work in the public school system, and
it's your fault, eh?
I know. Well, you get what you pay for.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my quiz question to students is, can you name the world's largest democracy? And the retort that I have gotten is, what's a democracy?
Yeah. Well, that's a depressing question.
Answer's India, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
So thanks, thanks, Janine. So it's true
I get
that democratic participation.
I think you're dead on. I mean, the whole question is, what does education consist in? And we tend to think that education for democracy is all about what you learn in school. But if you go to ancient Athens, for example, they learned very little in school per se. What they learned about their democracy, they learned in practice and actually working the institutions.
But, okay, so should we think democracy requires an educated, informed polity? Well, we don't have an educated, informed polity. Now, you can ask the question, whose fault is that? But maybe should it be a constraint on your full participation that you pass the test?
You don't have adequate education.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think that what we really
how
need...
are you a good judge of how we should live our common life if you don't know up from down, as it were?
Yeah, well, but the whole question of what are the ups and the downs we're looking at. It seems to me that all of the bad history that we have in the U.S. with literacy tests and so on for allowing people to vote go entirely in the wrong direction. What we need to have is people who, in a sense, have a kind of political literacy. They don't have to have any particular knowledge that is, as it were, reading and writing knowledge. What they need to do is have some knowledge about political institutions and how they work.
I think we can be a little bit elitist about. I don't know about Janine. She's got experience in the schools, but gosh, I mean, we have a pretty educated electorate compared to a lot of places. It seems to me that everybody can watch television, and if what television delivered was actually good stuff, they'd be prepared to vote. The problem is we have so much television today that just says, oh, well, let's hear what the president lies are for today, and now let's hear what the Democratic lies are for today.
Yeah.
I don't feel very educated sometimes when I try to get stuff from the media.
Well, you're listening to some good stuff now in the media, and we hope you feel informed and educated.
There's media and media.
Yeah, you're listening to Philosophy Talk. We'd like you to join our conversation. We're talking about democracy. Is this a way to run a democracy? With our guest, Josh Ober from Princeton University. You can join our conversation by giving us a call at 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Our conversation is starting to turn toward the imperfections of democracy. Weigh in. What do you think about the state of our democracy? Now, I want to ask you a question, though, along with lines of what John just said. The Chomsky has this thing. Instead of informed consent, he talks about manufactured consent, right? How the elites, right, the media, the political elites, the moneyed elites, they don't so much engage us in deliberation about the course of our shared lives. They just try to spin us, sell us, and you might think there's a reason for that they have to do that, just because the public is not sufficiently engaged, informed. There are complex issues facing us. And people you can't just dip in and out as in California ballot measures. You have to, have an ongoing stake and be informed about this.
Well, I think you do have to have an ongoing stake, but the question of how do you get informed and what do you need to be informed about? I think that really the key question we're sort of coming onto now is this whole question of what the relationship between democracy and communication. And if the communication is all one way from an elite media that has a particular or that have particular interests, then I think you're going to get deformations that ultimately may make democracy in any real sense impossible.
Let's make this communication two-way. We have a caller on the line, Frank in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Frank.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a great show.
So what's your question or comment?
My comment is sort of apropos what you're saying. I don't think the Founding Fathers ever had any faith that you could force people to make intelligent decisions and be intelligently informed. I mean, they didn't have Springer back then, but they knew people weren't always going to study the topics, which is why they set up a system of tripartite government where they wanted activist judges filtering decisions by the mob. They did not really want what we call a democracy. And in fact, we don't have what any traditional definition of a democracy is. What we have is a republic with a judicial system that's designed to prevent some of the worst abuses of the mob, what our founding fathers called the mob. Activist judges were fully intended to be activists.
Yeah, right. Frank, you're right. It's not just the activist judges; it's the Electoral College. It's the whole structure of the Senate representation. I mean, they have these long terms. They were appointed by the state legislatures, right? I mean.
Yeah, this is actually, it's fascinating because one of the reasons that we got the constitutional system that we did get is that the founders were terrified about real democracy. Their idea of real democracy was ancient Athens, and they got their whole understanding about ancient Athens from ancient writers who were highly critical of it and gave a very one-sided view. So as soon as we start rethinking Athens, we actually could start rethinking some of those checks and balances.
Well, I thanks for the call, Frank. It raises some very interesting questions. I think activist judges have been, on the whole, a pretty good thing for America. But on the other hand, in the terms of foreign policy, it seems to me the Founding Fathers never contemplated what we have now, which is a completely a non-consultative foreign policy. The president goes to the Senate and frames things in such a way that you're a coward or unpatriotic if you don't vote in favor of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution or whatever George Bush's resolution was called. I think it's very unsatisfactory given that most of our fortune, most of our decisions, most of our future depends on these foreign policy decisions.
The founders were really afraid of, as you say, the mob, the mass of us, the citizens. What I think that they didn't anticipate, exactly right, is that the executive, the leaders, the group that they themselves were part of, could in fact become a kind of an out-of-control government authority in itself.
This conversation there are these people who defend something called deliberative democracy, right? Democracy is supposed to have a deliberative character. It's not just adding up, the vector sum of your interest, my interest, your interest, my interest. We're supposed to deliberate together for the common good. I think that's a nice picture of the thing, except I never understand where the voting is supposed to happen. But I have a question about that. It seems that one of the things we're saying is we need all these mediating structures and institutions between the people and the government, right? So a media that informs people, schools that educate people, groups that say, here's your stake. So unions used to say, here's your stake, union member, in this issue, right? We have a whole arm that's studying these issues, and here's your stake in it if you're a member of our union. It seems to me one of the problems with our democracy now is that a lot of those institutions have either disappeared or gone corporate, like the media has gone corporate and is no longer really in the business of informing and educating.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, one of the, problems about democracy in modernity is it's so huge. The founders never imagined hundreds of millions of people involved in these institutions. And so as it gets huger, we need more of these mediating institutions. But with growth, in fact, as you suggest, many of the traditional mediating institutions have no longer or have lost their capacity to do their work.
Yeah, we have a lineup of callers in the line. Scott in San Francisco is next up. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Scott.
Thanks a lot. You guys touched for a second there on the Electoral College. I think that's a pretty important issue, especially being on Election Day.
Yeah.
I don't know much about that, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know much about it. I just know that it seems to be something that's problematic. So I'd like to hear you guys talk about that, and I will take my answer off the air.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, thanks. Good question. I'll tell you what I think about the Electoral College. I agree with the Founding Fathers. They had the two houses. The Senate is supposed to be more deliberative. It's not one person, one vote. Actually, all the states are required to have both their houses, one person, one vote in terms of how they're elected. The Senate isn't. That's fine. It recognizes the Republican nature of our of the government and little states, big states. But then they in the Electoral College, it carries over that same thing. That every state gets its 2 electoral votes for its senators and then 1 for each representative. That means that in South Dakota, where they have 1 representative and 2 senators, the effective power of each voter in the vote for president today is 3 times what it is for those of us here in California. I think that's carrying this non-democratic part too far. I'd like to see the Electoral College reformed.
What do you think, Jeff?
I'm not going to make any argument against that. It seems to me that this was one of these institutions that was put in place in order to insulate the final result from the direct will of the people. And it has, I think, added real problems. And in fact, ultimately, problems that we're no longer really perhaps willing to tolerate.
I mean, there's also a kind of historical contingency to any democratic polity, right? I mean, you have these 13 colonies, some large, some small, some already beginning to industrialize, some being agrarian, so a lot more land than people. I mean, even back then, right? And they had to enter this union together. And as a historical contingency, they had to strike a bargain. I mean, if we were in Iran and we were trying to move from theocracy to democracy, right? That would be that contingency. So you can't really get rid of the contingencies of history.
No, but if you think about what Jefferson imagined, that is that we would probably have a new constitutional convention quite often, that we'd be facing our new contingencies with new fundamental institutions. We're terrified to do that, maybe rightly.
Well, if I was in Delaware or Rhode Island, I would be terrified because they did pretty well in that original bargain with the 13 colonies.
Yeah,
but
except for this. Yeah.
I don't know that South Dakota or even my old home state of Nebraska really have some kind of long-term contractual agreement that they get to have as many senators as California.
Yeah, we have more callers on the line. Bruce in Portola Valley. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Bruce.
Hi, thank you. I want to make a comment about the size of our republic. I think that perhaps our founding fathers didn't have a sense of how large our population was going to get, and I feel increasingly distant from my elected representative. I mean, it's less and less likely that I'll run in to my congresswoman at the local tavern or across the backyard fence, and I feel like I can't get my ideas out and let them know what I'm thinking, what I believe in, unless I perhaps donate $100,000 to her reelection campaign.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the call. You've got a point there. I mean, so Josh, you were making that point earlier that once you get these large continental-sized things,
that democracy, I'm pretty convinced, actually depends on the capacity of people to get face-to-face, to learn one another's character, and to do a lot of business locally. As soon as you can't do that, or as soon as we lose the mediating institutions that get that kind of local democracy completely separated from what's happening at the national center, I think we're in trouble.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about democracy today, its promises, its reality. Next, we'll be talking about what to do about it. I mean, Josh was just diagnosing one of the big problems with our democracy. How do you think our democratic institutions might be modified or improved?
I'm an optimist. I believe in that old phrase, towards a more perfect union. Give us a call and tell us if you could change one thing about the structure of American democracy, what would it be? The Electoral College, the Senate, the federal income tax that gives all the money to the government furthest away?
You can join this conversation by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Or go to our webpage, www.philosophytalk.org. Click on the comments button. Philosophy Talk. We'll be right back.
With the flucture of the money, it's not coming to me. So now it's time for me to tell my homie Jerry D. So I'm looking at my wallet and I do not have a buck. Damn, I'm out of luck.
That's Far Side with If I Were President. I guess if I had a choice between the Far Side and the current administration.
Oh, John. I agree with you there.
I don't know. I do want to emphasize that although I've been talking a lot about California, we have friends and listeners in Oregon too, and I think that's a great state, fully worth having two senators. Maybe Oregon, since it's such a nice state, should have 3 or 4. I'm all for it.
Okay, I'm Ken Taylor. We're talking about democracy with Princeton University's Josh Ober. We want to hear from you. How do you think our democracy could be improved? What changes would you make? Give us a call at 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
We want to move into the question how our democratic system could be made more democratic, and since I've got the mic here, I'm gonna hop on my hobby horse.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that the tax structure really screws things up. I mean, California is a big place, plenty big enough to to make it difficult to get agreement in a democratic way and proper communication about all sorts of issues. But each of the local governments and the state governments, the smaller you get, the less likely you are to have control over money. Our state government controls the money that goes to local governments. Local governments can make decisions. Doesn't make much difference unless they can get them funded by the state. But the most efficient tax gathering machine is the federal income tax. Here our federal government, which is restricted from doing a lot of things or caring about a lot of things, has more money than anybody else and no real place to spend it except on foreign policy. In a way, couldn't we make our system more democratic by getting it back to the states and the localities, the fundamental decision making, at least where it's appropriate?
Well, I think that one really important and often forgotten principle of democracy is that decisions should be made as close to where they have effect as possible. So push it down to the local. If you don't have the funding such that you have meaningful carry-through of the decisions, you don't actually put money, attach money to decisions, you're going to have problems. So I would agree with that.
But I agree with you, both of you, in a way, but there's another side of that. Because, again, it's about this bigness thing. We're trying to build, one nation, indivisible, that kind of thing, with justice and liberty for all. Notice I left out the under God part. But anyway, we're trying to build one nation, one political community. I don't think a child's chances of a decent education, say, should depend on where they're born in that community. So, I think there is a national polity that has national commitments. So I actually think it's wrong that the government can't spend its money on ensuring that every child has a decent education. It seems to me in most nations of the world, it's a federal responsibility.
So in most nations, so you have a Democrat. So you see this big moral difference between a kid in Mexico and a kid in Texas, as opposed to a kid in Texas and a kid in Boston.
That's another issue: cosmopolitanism versus nationalism. And I'm a cosmopolitanist too, but I also believe in national allegiances and building a national community. That one nation stuff I think is important.
Yeah, I'm allegiant to the bear flag of California.
Okay, let's let some callers in here. Kai in Berkeley's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Kai.
How's it going?
Okay, and what's your question or comment?
Well, I missed a bit of the conversation before, but particularly my comment is about the Electoral College and its reform. And you had mentioned that California has a third of the power of, I think you said Wisconsin, as far as individual voters. And I think the Electoral College, just in its existence, really promotes the belief that people don't have control in their vote. Because the big issues, the president is decided by the Electoral College. And the president is what a lot of people come here to vote for. They don't come to vote necessarily on the propositions in their area. They don't come to vote on the resolutions that are passed. They want to make the big decisions. But the Electoral College is that one gigantic block to that personal control.
I think that's a really good point, Kai. And in most of the democracies around the world, the president is, if there is a president, is regarded as one of the bulwarks of the people. Like our House of Representatives, one of the jobs it is elected democratically, and the turnouts, presidential elections are much greater than other ones usually. So that indicates you're right about why people come to vote.
Josh, you want to weigh in?
Well, I think the other problem, Kai, is that with the Electoral College, there's a tendency for all of the emphasis of elections to go towards the relatively few contested states. We've seen that recently. So that you actually have to ask, is the whole structure of our electoral process being deformed by this Electoral College that directs way more attention to places that are contested and therefore directs attention away from places like California that are not.
Thanks, Kai. John, you have an email question.
I have an email question. Say we haven't had anybody really defend the Electoral College. I know George Will thinks it's a great thing. Maybe he'll call in. Here's an email question that's quite interesting. This is from Joanne James. And Joanne says, how can this be a democracy in the U.S. when only two parties are recognized? Think of the resistance there is to any other party. I have been voting third party for 30 years, and a little bit of it's cut off. Why is my voice not considered in decisions? And Josh, you brought up earlier about the danger of splintering, but isn't there a danger the other way? Not enough splinters?
Well, it's really a question of whether you have a genuine decision among your two parties, and that's been one of the questions that's been on the agenda, I think, for a while. So that really is a hard question. I think it's a good one. I think there really are terrible problems about breaking up into a whole mass of splinter parties. On the other hand, the inability of a third party to actually get traction does also add its own kind of deformation.
But I want to argue on the other side, because I think, the reason we have two parties and not more is because the two parties conspire with each other to make it very, very difficult for any third party to break through.
It's in their interest.
It's in their interest. But I think that in a system in which access to the ballot was easier, more open to all, that the deliberative character of democracy would be improved, because here's the party of the Greens, here's the party of the corporate interest, here's the party of the fundamentalists. None of them is going to win a majority on their own. So what do they have to do? They have to make compromises. They have to make coalitions, allegiances. They may be temporary and fluid, but it seems to me that because they're given the problem of trying to constitute a majority out of these diverse factions, because they're given that problem, they have to deliberate more together. They have to trade more together.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the problem is that small parties tend to be one issue. And it tends to attract people who care passionately about that issue and will have no interest in negotiating about that issue. So therefore, if we have a democracy by a bunch of parties, each one of them absolutely committed to their particular issue or small set of issues, deliberation's harder.
Let me ask a kind of semi-factual question about that. I remember back in the 50s, France had a terrible time governing itself. They had a new government every couple of weeks, it seemed, because they had so many parties that they just could not form stable coalitions. Then de Gaulle stepped in, and since his death, things have been pretty good in France. What did they make fundamental structural changes so that they seem to be able to have a combination of a number of parties and yet semi-stable governments?
I think the French have this remarkable capacity to reinvent themselves about every 50 years or so. And this was one of these spectacular reinventions. Instead of being Italy, they decided to become England. The next reinvention I'm just waiting for.
Yeah, well, so is George Bush, I guess. But okay, but there's a tension, I think. On the one hand, more parties, more access, I think, makes for more deliberation. The narrower the focus of those more parties, of those increased parties, the less deliberation, right? So if you have more parties with a broader agenda, then I think that would improve the deliberative character of democracy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the question is whether the whole structure of politics that is based around parties is the right way to do it. Once again, we tend to strongly associate parties as the basis of politics. In ancient forms of democracy, the idea that you would be committed to a particular party or faction meant that, in a sense, you were already embarked on the road to civil war.
Well, that's true, and the founders feared that, right?
They feared factions.
But also parties in the old days, before the voters got to choose the candidates in the primaries, parties in the old days were another one of these mediating institutions like unions that said, had dedicated long-term investment in this or that set of policies and explained those policies to their members and explained their stake. So they played, I think, an important role.
That's right, they did, but on the other hand, we remember why the primary system came in, because the party bosses simply had locked up the decision in advance. This, of course, finally came to a head in the Democratic Party in 1968 with chaos.
Well, yeah, 1968, lots of memories. But looking towards the future, I think we're in a bit of a transition period here with the importance of the Internet. Hard to predict, but I think one thing it does is it makes forming associations that are meaningful and can have some power much easier than it's ever been before, much less dependent on pre-existing structures. And I think that'll be a big story in the next 20 years of
I think you're right. I think you're right. But there's a bright side and a bright side and a dark side, because these terrorists, right, they can organize themselves without the benefit of state structures because of this very same thing. So it's,
No, that's quite true. And I think that I entirely agree with John that the Internet is going to be a big element in the future of democracy. On the other hand, I think that if we allow ourselves to imagine that the kind of relations we form on Internet chat groups and so on are going to replace the kind of face-to-face dealing with one another as human beings, as fully formed human beings, we're going to be losing something very important.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right about that, Josh. Fortunately, we're getting down to the end of the hour. This has been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed having you here. Our guest has been Josh Ober from Princeton University. Look for his newest book, Athenian Legacies: Essays on the Politics of Going On Together. It'll be out soon from Princeton University Press. Thanks for joining us, Josh.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Josh. We really appreciated having you here.
So, John, are you more inclined? Are you more satisfied with the state of our democracy? You started out kind of grouchy as usual.
Not a bit. I just think I've got better arguments and more refined insights than I had an hour ago. I still think that democracy at the federal level, American democracy, is in very bad shape, and I think we rely on the federal government to do too much, give it too much money. And what it does is it goes and spends it on the things that it's constitutionally thinks it's able to do, which is mostly mistaken.
See, I guess my political
but
consciousness...
then I'm just being optimistic.
Yeah, my political consciousness was formed in the days when the federal government was the beacon of liberation for people around this country. When the state said, we want to enslave, we want to keep black people in Jim Crow, the federal government came along and said, through the Supreme Court and through legislation, you can't do that stuff. We want to have literacy taxes and literacy tests and poll taxes. The federal government came along and said, you can't do that. So it's the thing that helped us build one nation. And I think it's really crucial.
Absolutely. I think the federal government's very good at telling states what they can't do, and that's its role, and that's what it should do, and that's really important. The Supreme Court's very important in that. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the federal government being the main mover and shaker, setting all of our speed limits and influencing. The states are big enough to do it on their own and much more qualified.
Except for Nebraska.
Yeah.
Anyway,
all right.
Let's. Why don't we give Ian Shows our final word on this topic? Ian Shows, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Shoals. When Plato wrote the Republic, it was some 30 years after a bitter defeat of Greece by Sparta, a tyrannical reign by the so-called 30 traitors, and the execution of his teacher Socrates for corrupting the morals of Athenian Greece. All of this may have colored his views of democracy as he shaped his own vision of a perfect society. In the Republic, Plato dismisses democracy as a legitimate government, claiming that when all are equal, authority is eroded and citizens will eventually stop paying attention to any law, paving the way for anarchy and for charismatic tyrants to restore order. Later, Thomas Hobbes, who thought people's innate evil natures made them unfit to govern themselves and favored an enlightened monarchy, nevertheless endorsed a concept he called the voice of the people, vox populi, in which a representative for a group of people could petition a king, who of course did not have to listen to them. But it was after the French and American revolutions that democracy, the flawed entity as we know it today, first became real. A Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, in the wake of the bloody French Revolution, in which several of his forebears were beheaded, and the subsequent rise of Bonaparte to power, decided to visit America and see how we were doing. He came here in the 1830s ostensibly to study prison reform, but instead he traveled for 10 months laying the groundwork for his masterpiece, Democracy in America. Part sociology, part anthropology, part psychology, part political theory, part philosophy, it is still being read today for his uncanny insights into the hopes, processes, and dangers of democracy. He worried, for instance, that democracy had a kind of leveling process. Everybody is educated and smart, but nobody is driven and brilliant, except in business. The United States had been established, he believed, by a group of remarkable enlightened men, the philosopher kings of America, you might say. He doubted that democracy would ever again produce their equal. He despised President Andrew Jackson, for instance. Democracy makes for bad foreign policy because our leaders are always changing, and therefore policy with it, making it impossible to create long-term strategies. More subtly, he worried about the effect democracy had on the American people. He thought it led to isolation and aimless restlessness and inability to pay attention, accompanied by an unwillingness to change our minds. If we believe we are all equal, he feared, it leads to a loss of individual identity, despite our vaunted praise of the individual. This leads to false pride on the one hand and what we now call low self-esteem on the other. And he feared we could become more interested in equality than liberty, creating a kind of tyranny of the masses. Despite his misgivings, however, Tocqueville could conclude that, quote, equality may be less elevated, but it is more just, and in its justice lies its greatness and beauty, unquote. If the American people are up to it, that is. Are we? I gotta go.
Wow, Ken, my head is dizzy from 60 seconds of rapid-fire philosophy.
If your head is dizzy, that means you've got a conundrum in your mind, and we can solve it for you, can't we, John?
Yes. Go to our webpage,
conundrums@philosophytalk.org, or hit that conundrums button on the webpage. We won't promise to solve your problem. Actually, I promise we won't solve it, but we will give you lots of new ways to think about it.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2004.
Executive producer is Gordon Earl.
Special thanks to Nicole Sawaya, Roman Mars, Peter Crimmins, and Alan Farley.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Hoover Institution, the Greenwald Foundation, and the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association.
Also from various groups at Stanford, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and members of KALW Information Radio 91.7 San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed on this program, however reasonable and true, do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our funders.
The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.